Okay, so good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are. Hello, Rachel and Violet is there somewhere in the background. This is our continuation of our Illumination of the Intention course, Illumination of the Intent. And we're going to begin with some prayers. Whoever is it Mary Ellen? Are you you put up it's good. Whoever is the person should have that already to go. There we go. Okay, I can't see.
I can see only part of it.
Yeah, I can just see part of it, Mary Ellen. Maybe I'm not sure what's happened there.
Okay, hold on, let me try again.
Maybe you were sharing a whole screen or something.
Prayers. Is it showing now?
Well, it may be. There we go. There we go. Okay. So we're going to begin. If you can make it just a little bit larger. There you go. Maybe once more. Okay. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrators. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrators. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrators. So when we do that, think of the reasonings. When we say I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the highest assembly, the triple gem, the Tibetans, you can say each of them individually, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or in this case, the Mahayana Sangha, the Supreme Assembly. But when you think of them as just that trinity, the three jewels, or the triratna, the Tibetans have, instead of saying Norbu Sum or something like that, they say Konchok Sum. Kon means rare, chok means supreme. So to think in that way gives you a feeling, we're so fortunate to have met the teachings that the Buddha himself gave some 2,500 years ago, because they're very rare in the world. Not all world systems do the teachings of the Buddha exist, and they're supreme. They're teachings that can lead us out of suffering into enlightenment. So that often moves my mind when I think of that, when you think of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to also think how rare the opportunity is to have met them. And then short mandala, by offering this ground, anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and moon, visualized as a Buddha realm, may all migrators enjoy such a pure realm. And then requests, O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. So when we talk about Dharmakaya wisdom, the Buddha's Dharmakaya, wisdom Dharmakaya, is the omniscient mind, has two aspects. One that perceives just conventional reality, one that perceives just emptiness. So within that sky of the Dharmakaya, sort of vast empty sky, sort of made, the Buddha, through his omniscient mind, knowing what the trainees need to progress, were requesting him to send down a rain of conventional, in conventional aspect of the teachings. Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami. So we're going to begin with a little meditation, just to calm our minds, sort of relieve ourselves of the continuity of, conventional thoughts that we were having beforehand. So sit comfortably. Place your attention on the breathing. And leaving everything aside, once you've recognized the breathing, hold it in mind with mindfulness to the exclusion of all other thoughts. If your eyes are closed or partially closed, don't focus on the darkness. That's something that your mental consciousness is accessing via knowing what the senses are experiencing. Focus instead on just the respiration, the wind element, that which is light and moving. Once you've calmed your mind from the incessant chatter by watching the breathing, now bring your attention to your mental consciousness. As your focal object. And try to recall, with the remembering consciousness, its clear light nature, or if starting from scratch, recognize it, that the thoughts, feelings, judgments, memories, plans are all like clouds in the clear light nature of your mind. Clear light in the sense of not forming any obstruction to the arisal of mental events or any kind of hindrance to them leaving. That even the appearance of thoughts to your mind with the right orientation of your intellect, you recognize they could not be present unless the mind had this clear light nature. This is the conventional nature of your mind, the conventional clear light nature of your mind. It's something that's known by your intellect, by your mind, not by the senses. It doesn't have a shape or color. It's an understanding. Try to hold that. Once you found it for an instant, try to hold it with concentration, with mindfulness. This is also called the developmental Buddha nature, as opposed to the non-abiding Buddha nature, which is the emptiness of the mind. This clear light, conventional nature of the mind indicates that we can develop all the good qualities and eliminate all our faults. And is an incredible resource when you are depressed, when you're unhappy, when things go wrong. Also an incredible resource when things are going really well. You've won the lottery. You've fallen in love, whatever. Just to remember all of these events are just like clouds in the clear light nature of our mind. They're impermanent. And not to respond to the appearance of them with inappropriate attention, feeling giddy and, self-confident when things go well, feeling depressed and morose when things go bad. This great resource we always have. It's just that we don't pay attention to it. The fact that we can recognize it now is due to the fact that we have this auspicious moment, this life of leisure and endowment. Right now, we're free of what we eventually will experience again in the future, suffering in the lower realms, being born even as a human in a place and time when the Buddha teachings do not exist. The Buddha Dharma doesn't exist, in a place where we're not free to practice it. Or when we are deficient, we're deaf or dumb, we have no faith at some point in the Dharma. Right now, we're free of those factors. And because of that, we're meditating on this clear light nature of the mind. recognizing the utility of the life of leisure and endowment, this auspicious moment that we have just for a short time. I can make finishing touches to enlightenment or to liberation. Or if, like most of us, we still have not yet entered the path, we can make progress in that by developing renunciation, bodhicitta, great compassion, bodhicitta, the wisdom that realizes emptiness. We can leave imprints in our mind to find real happiness in the future, real Dharma happiness, long-lasting happiness. But to do so for ourselves alone would be very selfish when we consider that all living beings are in exactly the same situation as us, caught in the great ocean of suffering, of cyclic existence, incarcerated in the prison-like concentration camp of cyclic existence. Not realizing how we can get out. All living beings are exactly equal with us in wanting to have happiness, wanting to be free of suffering. That equality alone is enough to feel some empathy for them, but to recall also their kindness when they've been our mother numberless times in the past, have been depthlessly kind, giving us a body, education, enjoyments, protection. Looking upon not only my own suffering, my own situation in cyclic existence and wanting to get out, but recognizing all our mothers are in exactly the same situation. Some now as humans, some in the hell realms, some as hungry ghosts, some as animals, insects, some in the God realms, but eventually caught in this ocean of cyclic existence, thinking how wonderful it would be if I could remove all of my past mothers from suffering and set them into everlasting, stable happiness of enlightenment. In order to do that, I myself have to be free of suffering, to know the paths that can lead sentient beings out of suffering, to know it without error, all of the methods, all the paths that lead to enlightenment. So I myself, for the welfare of others, in order to really benefit them, I must become enlightened. Not just become an advocate for others this lifetime, showing them the best methods to, find a job, get health insurance, whatever. I myself must become enlightened to lead them out of suffering in future lives into happiness. And for that reason, I'm going to listen to the teachings today, the talk today, on the Buddha's teachings about emptiness, encapsulated by Nagarjuna, commented by Chandrakirti, and explained by Lama Khapa. I'm going to listen to the teachings with the intention that in so doing, I'll accumulate the collection of merit and wisdom, get, some of that in my quest to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. I'm going to listen, participate, contemplate, and meditate in order to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. That's my long-term goal. Whatever happens between now and then, it's, of no great importance, like the bus trip from Dharamsala to Delhi. You want to get to Delhi. If the bus stops at some tea shop along the way and the tea is rancid and the food is inedible, doesn't matter. Your long-term goal is to achieve enlightenment. So in this lifetime, whatever happens, you're sick or having problems, other people don't like you, you lose. It's just like that tea shop along the way. Your main destination is enlightenment. I'm going to participate today in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. So, hello. Suvash has shown up. Stephen's there. So before we begin, does anyone have any questions left over? I think, Mikhail, did you get your question answered?
Yeah. You
Okay.
answered. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I may add something.
Yeah.
I was. My question came reading the inside chapter of Lama Chenmo, and there is toward the end a quote from Aknakara Shanti, Instructions for the Perfection of Wisdom. And Tsongkhapa was explaining the 4 types and 3 types and 6 types of special insight. And Aknakara Shanti says, completing the cultivation of the 4-fold insight frees you from the bondage of rebirth in the miserable realms. And from that, I'm not sure, but is it meaning that this insight will free you only from the bondage of rebirth in the lower realms, not more?
So I'm not sure of that quotation and of the others of the other elements that you're talking about. So if you can email me, the page number, which translation are you using? The Snow Lion translation?
Yeah.
Last volume on special insight. Yeah. So send me the pages and reference to that, and I'll get back to you. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. And Suvansh, you have your nice hand up.
Yes, Venerable George, I had a quick question. It doesn't pertain to it's related, but not directly out of the text. I'm just curious. I was in a dream yoga retreat this weekend with Dr. Nida Chenak-Sang, and he made a comment which was very interesting. He said that for the bodhisattvas who are on the bhumis, they will get, they will recognize the accomplishment of a bhumi of, okay, in their dreams. So the sign of accomplishment will arise in the dream. And I hadn't read that, but I thought I'll just share it with you. And do you have any comments?
So I don't think that's necessarily the only way a bodhisattva realizes that they're on the bhumis. Bodhisattva, as I've mentioned in other contexts, it's not as though a bodhisattva doesn't know where they are, that they've reached a particular state. The path is something that's continuous and long, and they have actual, say for instance, when they have a realization of emptiness, well, say before the path of seeing, realization of emptiness can be conceptual and so forth. It can go from a wrong view to a doubt whether phenomena are inherently existent or not, a doubt that still thinks they might be inherently existent, an equal balanced doubt, a doubt leading in the right direction. Then they would recognize what their state of mind is. Then if they have a correct belief, they haven't yet realized emptiness, they would know now, yeah, I'm confident that phenomena are not inherently existent. They would have that experience in their mind. So it's not as though they're somewhere earlier. When they have, through analysis, say the 4-point analysis, and they have an insight into emptiness, they would have an understanding, that there was some clear understanding of emptiness and so forth. So all along the path, they kind of know where they are. There are certain events, certain milestones that they might have insight to in dreams. Generally, that's not the main way that a bodhisattva would know where they are, by some kind of dream experience. It might be in certain, say for instance, when they achieve the first bhumi, like we're talking about now, the bodhisattvas on the first bhumi, right? So that means they're on the path of seeing, and they have a special practice of the perfection of generosity. So in their dreams, they may, even in those dreams, they may have, if they're aware of their dreams, they may experience, that kind of generosity, giving up their body and so forth for others in their dreams. When they reach the second bhumi, where there's a special practice of the perfection of ethics or morality, right? So the first bhumi, path of seeing, when they leave that and they achieve the second bhumi, they have a special practice of the perfection of morality. So one of the signs in dreams would be that even in a dream, they would not break any of their vows. They wouldn't kill in their dreams. Maybe now, do you ever have dreams where you do something? Well, I don't want to ask you directly. You can imagine someone might do something naughty in their dreams, like that, maybe sexual misconduct or stealing or, hurting or something like that. So in their dreams, they would not even have that, the tendency to break any of their vows of restraint from negative karma and so forth. But those are not the main main indicators.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have something? Okay. Stephen, you okay? Yeah, okay, excellent. Okay, so we're going to continue on in our text. I'll just give a little, we're right on the section on how on the seventh ground, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas are outshone by means of the Bodhisattva's intelligence. So someone with a text, what page is that? Who has the actual text? I don't have the printed page number of that.
It's 77.
Page 77, okay, of the printed text. So I will put that in. Page 77, okay, good. So just before that, just to give the context, the section that we just finished when we were talking about how the bodhisattvas on the first ground outshine the hearers and solitary realizers by means of their merit. So at the end of that, just before this section, it says, in the compendium of training, right? Who wrote the compendium of training? Doris, do you remember?
Shantideva?
Yeah, thanks, Doris.
Oh, sorry.
I would have said that.
Okay, good, excellent. So Shantideva wrote the Shiksha Samuchaya, the compendium of training. He wrote the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, and then as a source material for that, he wrote the compendium of training with a lot of quotations, kind of like Nagarjuna's compendium of sutra, where Nagarjuna gave all of these sutra quotations. So in the compendium of training by Shantideva, the above sutra is cited, and the above sutra was the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, I guess. That quotation that came right before that. In the compendium of training, the above sutra is cited to substantiate the point that one should not disparage an awakening that is divorced from the bodhisattva's deeds. In other words, if a bodhisattva is not practicing the deeds, is sort of lazy, like me, not that I'm even a bodhisattva, but you shouldn't disparage someone who's divorced from the bodhisattva deeds, who isn't practicing, and that is impossible for someone who has attained the bodhisattva grounds to have an awakening mind divorced from the deeds. So the quotation that from the Siksha Samuchaya, from an English translation of that, says, "You should not despise the awakening mind, even if it is not accompanied by practice." If someone is supposedly is a bodhisattva, but they're not practicing, because it still produces endless happiness within cyclic existence. This is described in the noble spiritual biography of Maitreya. So that's the one of the sutras that talks about the life of Maitreya. Okay, so that's where we were last time. So that mainly finishes the section about how the bodhisattvas on the first ground outshine the hearers and solitary realizers by means of merit. Now, in that context, now we get on the seventh ground, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas are outshone by means of the bodhisattva's intelligence, or how the bodhisattvas on the seventh ground outshine the hearers and solitary realizers in terms of their intelligence. And you might wonder, why are we talking about the seventh ground? We're just on the first ground. So that's going to become clear here. So the root text, the Madhyamaka Avatara Karika, verse 8 says, "When at gone afar," that's the name that's given to the seventh ground. Just like the first ground is called what? Do you remember, Ida? Do you know what the first ground is called? Ida?
It would be the joyful one?
Yeah, joyous or very joyful or something like that.
Mhm.
The seventh ground is called gone afar. So when at gone afar, when on the seventh ground, the bodhisattva will also surpass them, the hearers and solitary realizers, by his intelligence. So this is in the Chandrakirti's text. So it's not as though this is just coming out of nowhere. Chandrakirti actually mentions it on the first, in the explanation of the first ground. So Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary says, when this bodhisattva on the first ground arrives at the ground of gone afar, long time in the future, when they reach the seventh ground, in addition to outshining Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through his conventional awakening mind, he will also surpass them, especially by the power of his intelligence, or her intelligence. This is stated in the Dashibhumaka, the Sutra of the 10 Grounds. Children of the conquerors, it is like this. The son of a king born into the royal lineage and bearing the name of royalty. Okay, this is a prince who's just a baby. Because of the king's majesty, outshines the entire assembly of ministers the instant he is born. Here we can say he because we're talking about the prince. We're not talking about the princess, right? He does not achieve this through his critical acumen, by the power of his intelligence. He does not achieve this through his critical acumen, by the power of his intelligence. He outshines them by his class, by his being in the royal caste. However, at the point he reaches maturity, I'm not sure when that would be, 21, 17, anyway, when he reaches maturity by exercising the power of his intelligence, he totally exceeds the activities of all the ministers. So right from the start, he doesn't exceed them by means of his intelligence, but as he grows older and he's become studied and exercises his intelligence, he exceeds them by the power of his intelligence. Likewise, O children of the conquerors, Jina Putra, the bodhisattva, because of the greater power of his altruistic intention, outshines all Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas the instant he generates the awakening mind. And here, the context, of course, is that it's talking about the ultimate awakening mind when he reaches the first bhumi. Indirectly, we saw that even when he just generated the conventional bodhicitta, say on the path of accumulation, he also outshines them, even though his bodhicitta is like a sliver of the ultimate bodhicitta he'll have on the first ground. But mainly here is talking about Jinaputra, the bodhisattva, because of the greater power of his altruistic intention, outshines all Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas. The instant he generates the awakening mind, that means the ultimate awakening mind and the path of seeing, this is not achieved through his critical acumen, by the power of his intelligence. However, the bodhisattva on the seventh ground, since he abides with the greatness of his knowledge of the relevant object, totally exceeds all the works of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas. So what is this talking about? In the Madhyamaka Vatara itself, it says, bodhisattvas dwelling on the seventh bodhisattva ground completely surpass the hearers and solitary Buddhas in every way due to the exalted nature of their wisdom's range. So this is not saying, it's not giving an exact definition of what that means by wisdom's range. but by means of their intelligence, somehow their wisdom or intelligence, at that point on the seventh ground, they exceed the hearers and solitary realizers. So that's the starting point of this. This is a quotation from the Madhyamaka. So Nagarjuna himself quoted the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis extensively in his Sutra Samuchaya, and in the Siksha Samuchaya also quotes it. Chandrakirti himself depends very much on the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis to explain the Bodhisattva grounds all through. So that's important to know. So Lama Tsongkhapa continues. So that was a quotation, right, from the 10 Bhumi Sutra about the prince when he has maturity exceeds all the ministers. And then the 10 Bhumi Sutra also says on the seventh ground, the bodhisattvas exceed the hearers and solitary realizers by means of their intelligence. So the Lama Tsongkhapa continues, given that the phrase, the instant he generates the awakening mind, is being used here in the context of the first ground, this is just what I was saying a moment ago, it refers to the awakening mind of pure altruistic intention. That means it's referring to ultimate awakening mind or ultimate bodhicitta. So it is only from the ground of gone afar, from the seventh ground, that the bodhisattva outshines Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through the power of his or her own intelligence as well. You might think, well, a second, the hearers and solitary realizers, you might think that they don't necessarily realize emptiness, right? You might think that they can achieve liberation, become arhats, by just meditating on the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. Who believes that, Stephen? Who believes that you can become liberated by become an arhat by just meditating on the emptiness of a self-supporting, substantially existent person? And I can see your thinking there. That's
I want to say Svatantrika, Venerable George, but I'm having like a little bit of a doubt here.
Little brain freeze. Okay,
Yeah.
so even the Sautrantika, say the Hinayana tenets and the Vaibhashikas say that one can become an arhat by realizing the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. Even some of the Chittamatrans say that you can achieve liberation by realizing the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. And some of the Madhyamakas below Prasangika, the Svatantrikas, also say that some of them say that you can become liberated from cyclic existence by realizing that. But that's not the intention. That's not accepted by Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Lama Tsongkhapa. So it is only on the, so you might think, well, when the bodhisattva reaches the path of seeing, they have realized emptiness directly. So they should excel those hearers and solitary realizers, those arhats, who've only realized the emptiness of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. They should excel them by means of intelligence on the first ground. But here the text says that's not the case. They don't excel them by means of intelligence until the seventh ground. So the implications of that are that, well, we'll see here. One of the implications is that the hearers in solitary realizer arhats must have realized emptiness. Even the Aryas, the hearer and solitary realizers, must have realized emptiness, not just the emptiness of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, but the actual emptiness that Prasangika talks about, the emptiness of inherent existence. So we'll see as we go along here. So it is only from the ground of Gaunafar, the seventh ground, that the Bodhisattva outshines Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through the power of his or her own intelligence as well. He does not outshine them through the power of his intelligence on the sixth ground and below. So not on the first ground, not on the second, third, fourth, or even sixth ground, where he has a special practice of the perfection of wisdom. He doesn't excel them by means of their intelligence. Kind of already anticipates that the hearers and solitary realizers have realized the emptiness of inherent existence, you know, when they become an Arya, and when they are Arhats, they have done that. The phrase exceeding all the activities of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas means the Bodhisattva outshines these two categories of beings through his intelligence. That this is so can be understood on the basis of the commentary's summary statement. Okay, let's go back. So it says the phrase exceeding all of the activities of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas. Where does that phrase come? Anyone?
It's just at the end of that quote, right?
Yeah, it's just at the end of the quote from the Dashabhumika, not the quote. I'm not sure. I think it's in the when the Dashabhumika talks about the first ground. So it says right at the end of that quote, just before note 136, it says, however, the Bodhisattva on the seventh ground, since he abides with the greatness of his knowledge of the relevant object, totally exceeds all the works of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas. So that phrase, the phrase exceeding all the activities of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, means the Bodhisattva outshines these two categories of beings through his intelligence. Let me get back so I can see all of you here. How are we doing here? I'm going to be able to see all of you. There we go. This is so can be understood on the basis of the commentary's summary statement. So what is this talking about? Jeffrey Hopkins, in Jeffrey Hopkins' translation, he says, Chandrakirti's condensed commentary on this shows that surpassing all of the activities of the hearers and solitary realizers means surpassing them through intelligence, through his intelligence. And in that context, the translation of the Madhyamaka Vatara, because Lama Tsongkhapa is quoting Chandrakirti here. Remember what Lama Tsongkhapa is doing. Lama Tsongkhapa is commentating, giving a commentary on both the Karikas by Chandrakirti and Chandrakirti's auto commentary. So here it's Lama Tsongkhapa is alluding to Chandrakirti's commentary on this verse. So in my translation of that, it says, one should know, this is from Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Vatara Bhasham, the auto commentary. One should know, therefore, indeed, only from the gone afar, the seventh ground, onwards, does a bodhisattva also outshine the hearers and solitary realizers due to the generation of the strength of his own intelligence, not on lower grounds. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa is referring to here. This is so can be understood on the basis of the commentary's summary statement. That's the commentary's summary statement. Lama Tsongkhapa continues, in the explanation of what is meant by the power of intelligence, there is the phrase, he abides with the greatness of his knowledge of the relevant object. So Hopkins translates it. The sutra explains the power of intelligence as abiding in the greatness that is the knowledge of his own sphere. Chimpa says relevant object. This is the greatness of knowing cessation, the limit of reality, the sphere of the bodhisattva. So let's look at that again. In explanation of what is meant by the power of intelligence, there is the phrase, he abides with the greatness of his knowledge of the relevant object, or his own sphere. This is the greatness of the bodhisattva knowing his own sphere, his relevant object. What is that? Cessation. What is cessation? Don, do you know what cessation means?
Do I know what sensation means? Is that,
Yeah.
I don't know how the exact description would be, yeah.
So when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, what's the third truth? Third Noble Truth.
Truth of cessation.
Truth is cessation. So that means cessation of what?
Affliction.
No, not just affliction. We say cessation of karma and klesha, right? So first noble truth, truth of suffering. Second noble truth, the truth of the origin. And the truth of the origin of suffering is, what is the origin of suffering? Karma and klesha, not just the afflictions. Karma is what immediately causes the suffering, and klesha is what causes the karma, right? So when you talk about the truth of cessation, it's talking about a state in which you ceased karma and klesha, or afflictions or delusions, you know. So that's one meaning of cessation. So the text says, this is the greatness of the bodhisattva knowing his own sphere, his special sphere or relevant object, cessation, which is the perfect endpoint. Jeffrey translates perfect endpoint as the limit of reality. And I talked about this before. The limit of reality is a phrase. In Tibetan, it says Yangdakbe ta. Ta means limit or end. Yangdakpa means perfect or reality. So the end of the end point, you might say. In Sanskrit, okay, there we go. In Sanskrit, it is Bhuta Koti. Bhuta Koti. So this is a very famous phrase in the sutras. It's referring to the state of perfect realization of emptiness when the delusions are, ceased and so forth. In the explanation of what is meant by the power of intelligence, there is the phrase, he abides with the greatness of his knowledge of the relevant object, or as Jeffrey says, of his own sphere. This is the greatness, the bodhisattva, this is the greatness of the bodhisattva knowing his relevant object, or his own sphere, which is cessation, which is the perfect endpoint. On this point, one, some assert that although there is no difference between gnosis on the sixth ground and below, and that of the seventh ground with respect to their natures, so this is, Lama Tsongkhapa is explaining now what other people have posited as the meaning of that. So in terms of their nature of realizing emptiness on the sixth ground and seventh ground, they both realize emptiness perfectly. So that's not in doubt here. Some assert that although there is no difference between the gnosis, the wisdom of those on the sixth ground and below, and that on the seventh ground, with respect to their natures, they both realize emptiness the same way. The former, the sixth ground and below, do not possess the capacity to eliminate the obstructions to omniscience, obstructions to knowledge, the jnana avarana. You know, we've talked before, when we talk about the Buddhist, when we talk about the Mahayana, we say there are two main obstructions: the obstructions to liberation and the obstructions to omniscience, right? Or here, Jimpa says obstructions to knowledge. So what that means is that which obstructs or hinders you from achieving liberation, which are also called the klesha avarana, the afflicted obstructions. So once you get rid of the afflictions, the delusions, you know, anger, attachment, and so forth, you've ceased them by meditating on the proper, according to your tenet system, whether it be selflessness of persons or emptiness and so forth. Once you've eliminated them, you can achieve liberation, or you have achieved elimination once you've ceased them from the root. But it's understood that even having achieved liberation, you have not achieved omniscience. You're not yet a Buddha. Remember when we talked about the arhats, they may remain in that state of nirvana for even eons until they're awakened by the Buddhas and encouraged to develop bodhicitta and achieve omniscience. So there's a difference there. The obstructions to omniscience are more subtle, or the obstructions to knowledge. The former, that is the sixth ground and below, do not possess the capacity to eliminate the obstructions to knowledge, obstructions to omniscience, while the gnosis of the seventh ground has that capacity. That's what some people say, but that's not the position of Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Lama, Tsong, Khapa. This, they assert, makes the difference between outshining and not outshining through intelligence. So as we'll see in just a moment, this position is incorrect. So that's what some people say. Other people say, number two, some maintain that this difference is because from the seventh ground onward, the bodhisattva is able to enter into meditative concentration through a process of leaping over. And we did mention this, I think, in one of the earlier talks. Leaping over is a kind of practice that the bodhisattvas do engage in to increase their concentration. They'll say, enter into the first concentration. You know, when we talk about concentration of the form realm, right? The first jnana. And then usually to go from the first jnana to the second jnana, you have to, in order to go from the first to the third, you have to go from the first to the second, and then from the second to the third, right? They're sequential like that. But the bodhisattvas, when they have developed very great ability, training of mind, I think even the Shravakas can do this also. They can leap over. They can go from the first concentration of the form realm. They're still in human body, let's say, but their meditative state is one of the first jnana. They can jump to the third jnana, the third concentration of the form realm. Generally, there are 4 concentrations of the form realm, right? They can jump over. So that's what's being referred to here, and that we'll see in a couple of moments. That also is not right. That's what some people claim. Still others, Lama Tsong Khapa is looking at all of the different commentators. Still others claim that the bodhisattva outshines the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas through his intelligence because the gnosis of the seventh ground is manifestly directed toward the irreversible eighth ground. And also that's, Lama Khapa will show in a moment, that's hogwash also. So these different interpretations. So he'll give his own interpretation, but first of all, he's going to correct these wrong views. So of the first of these, the first position is incorrect. What was the first position? That although there's no difference between the gnosis of those on the sixth ground and below and that of the seventh with respect to their natures, the former do not possess the capacity to eliminate the obstructions to knowledge. So I mentioned this before. It's the position of the some of the lower schools that the bodhisattva can start to eliminate the obstructions to omniscience or the obstructions to knowledge, even on the first ground and on the second ground and so forth. So for this, of these, the first position is incorrect. For in this tradition of Chandrakirti, it is maintained that all instances of grasping at self-existence of persons are forms of afflicted ignorance, and to eliminate this ignorance so that it cannot resurface, its seeds must be exhausted as well. So what's it saying? So the people who say that the obstructions to omniscience could be eliminated on the first ground and the second ground and the third ground and so forth, their interpretation is that the obstructions to liberation, of course, some of them have been ceased on the first ground, the diluted obscurations, the obstructions to liberation, but that in realizing emptiness, the Buddha is also eliminating something more subtle than the obstructions to liberation. According to those people who explain it this way, the obstructions to liberation can be eliminated simply by realizing the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. So those are eliminated on the path of seeing, some of them, the intellectually formed ones, but also the bodhisattva in realizing emptiness, according to these lower tenets, that bodhisattva also now is eliminating something which is an obstruction to omniscience, grasping at true existence. Prasangika says, no, that's not right. Grasping to true existence is indeed a diluted obscuration. It's not something, it's not an obstruction to omniscience. You need to eliminate that even to achieve liberation, grasping to true existence. So of these, the first position is incorrect. For in this tradition of Chandrakirti is maintained that all instances of grasping at self-existence of persons, inherent existence of persons, are forms of afflicted ignorance. Whereas the lower tenets say, no, that's not an afflicted ignorance. That's an obstruction to omniscience. You don't need to have that to eliminate, the lower tenets say, you don't need to have that to eliminate the afflictions. You don't have to eliminate grasping to true existence, grasping to inherent existence to eliminate the afflictions. For in this tradition of Chandrakirti is maintained that all instances of grasping at self-existence of persons, in inherent existence of persons, are forms of afflicted ignorance. And to eliminate this ignorance so that it cannot resurface, its seeds must be exhausted as well. Furthermore, since such elimination of afflictions and their seeds is common with the two arhats as well, right? Really, even the lower tenets would say the arhats have to eliminate the afflictions, but they don't include grasping to true existence, grasping to inherent existence as an affliction. But since such an elimination of afflictions is common with the two arhats, what are the two arhats? Richard, do you know who the two arhats are here?
Would that be the Pratyeka Buddhas and the Shravakas?
Yeah, the hearer arhats, or the Shravaka arhats, and the Pratyeka Buddha arhats. So that's what, when you start talking about the two arhats. Furthermore, since such elimination of afflictions is common with the two arhats, hearer and solitary realizer arhats, as well, eliminating the seeds of grasping at true existence does not constitute eliminating the obstructions to knowledge or the obstructions to omniscience. How are we doing? Am I making sense? Some of you who've read ahead, maybe. Rachel, what are you thinking? Is it making sense?
I'm following you, George, but I can't say I've read ahead. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. So this is a subtle point. So the lower tenets say that it's possible to achieve liberation without realizing emptiness, because they say that emptiness is an antidote to grasping at true existence, grasping at inherent existence, but you don't need to eliminate that to achieve liberation. You just need to eliminate the grasping at a self-supporting, substantially existent person, which is grosser, right? They say that the bodhisattvas go further than that, and they eliminate the grasping at inherent existence. And when they begin to do so on the first bhumi, because they've realized emptiness directly, that they are also eliminating the obstructions to omniscience at that point. They've eliminated some of the obstructions to liberation, and they've also eliminated some of the obstructions to omniscience. Prajnanika says that's not the case, because even grasping to true existence is considered an affliction, a deluded obstruction, an afflicted obstruction, an obstruction to liberation. Okay, where are we here? So, furthermore, since such an elimination of afflictions is common with the two arhats, they have to eliminate the afflictions. Eliminating the seed of grasping at true existence does not constitute eliminating the obstructions to knowledge. It's something that the hearers and solitary realizers have to do. So this is refuting the first idea. As for obstructions that are in the form of residual imprints, in Tibetan we say bakcha, or imprints, which are distinct from seeds. Okay, remember, the delusions and their seeds are the objects to be eliminated in order to achieve liberation. But the imprints, which are distinct from seeds, say the imprints of grasping at true existence, is something more subtle. It's those imprints that can be in the category of obstructions to omniscience. The imprints are like, remember the example of the garlic in the pestle. You're making some good, what's it called, Diana? What did we have? The green stuff, pesto, right? You have to crush up some garlic, maybe, depending on your recipe. I think some Italians like to just chop it up. They like have big pieces of garlic. Some people crush it. Say in whatever bowl you have with the garlic, even you've taken out the garlic from the bowl where the garlic has resided, or you've crushed it. It doesn't look like there's any garlic there. There's still the odor of garlic there. That's kind of like the imprint. So even when you've eliminated the delusions and their seeds, which are like the pieces of garlic, there's still an imprint in the mind, something more subtle than the seeds. It's those imprints that are the obstructions. Well, they are among the obstructions to omniscience. There are other obstructions to omniscience, but they are categorized there too. As for obstructions that are in the form of residual imprints, which are distinct from seeds, different than seeds, identify here as obstructions to knowledge. They're not the only obstructions to knowledge, but they are identified as obstructions to knowledge. Their elimination does not occur until the 8th ground. For Prasangika, you don't eliminate those imprints of grasping at true existence until you reach the 3 pure bhumis, the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis. Their elimination does not occur until the 8th ground. It doesn't mean they're all eliminated on the 8th ground. You start to eliminate them, the obstructions to omniscience, on the 8th ground. Therefore, Chandrakirti's system does not accept the presentation of those schools of thought that maintain that grasping at true existence is an obstruction to knowledge, an obstruction to omniscience. Some of the schools say, just eliminating the grasping at a self-supporting, substantially existent person, you have eliminated the obstructions to liberation. But Prasangika says that's not enough. You also have to eliminate the grasping to inherent existence or true existence. Therefore, Chandrakirti's system does not accept the presentation of those schools of thought that maintain that grasping a true existence is an obstruction to knowledge, and that on that basis, elaborate 9 classes of obstructions to knowledge in terms of their strength, weak, medium, and great, or you say small, medium, and great. So you have, how do you get 9 out of 3? You have weak, weak, medium, weak, great, weak. Weak, medium, 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 great, medium, weak, great, medium, great, great, great. Those are the categorized by not the Prasangika, but by the lower schools when they say that on these, from the 1st ground on, you start to eliminate the obstructions to omniscience. And they say that there are these 9 levels like that. Therefore, Chandrakirti's system does not accept the presentation of those schools of thought that maintain that grasping a true existence is an obstruction to knowledge. They do not accept the presentation that maintains that grasping a true existence is an obstruction to omniscience. And on that basis, those other people elaborate 9 classes of obstruction to knowledge in terms of their strength, which are eliminated on the path of meditation, on the 2nd ground and up. So, so according to these lower tenets, you don't eliminate the obstructions to omniscience on the 1st ground. I may have misspoken before. You don't when you have that first realization of emptiness. But on the 2nd ground, when you've entered the path of meditation, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, up to the 10th ground, you're constantly eliminating obstructions to omniscience. But Prasangika says that's not right. Okay. I will explain more about this point below. So that will be on, if you have your written text, on pages 239 to 244. I researched that. I guess that's what Jimpa has in that note, right? So that the explanation about how the obstructions to omniscience are, which are eliminated on the path of meditation and second. I will explain more about this point below. Okay, so that eliminates the first point of some people saying the obstructions to omniscience are eliminated on the second ground and so forth, which is not the case, not the present Gika position. The second position is also incorrect. It's also hogwash. I'm using hogwash as a generic phrase here rather than something more graphic, okay? In lexicons of archaic Tibetan terms, the word for leaping over in Tibetan is tugel, and I think when Paul was with us, Paul is off with one of his old friends, one of our old friends, and he's in in his last days. I think he's in Washington or Oregon, someplace right now. But when we talked, I think in our last class, we talked about tugel. Sometimes that's mentioned in the Dzogchen teachings, the sort of leaping over, but has a different meaning. But here, leaping over or togel is written also as jumbled sequence, ngelshi. So Jeffrey translates this as leaping over signifies a disordering of stages, and there is no source showing that such a leap over does not occur in the meditative stabilization on the sixth ground and below, but does on the seventh. So Lama Khapa says the second position is also correct. It was that on the seventh ground you're able to leap over, but there is no explanatory basis as to why entering into meditative concentrations through such a leaping over process would not be found on the sixth ground and below, but would be present only from the seventh ground onward. So in other words, you don't find it in the Dashabhumika Sutra, any other sutra that says on the seventh ground, the Bodhisattva is able to leap over where he wasn't able to leap over before. Generally, the Bodhisattvas, even before the path of seeing, I believe, can do this kind of leaping over. Leaping over means going from the first concentration to the third concentration, leaping over the second, or you can even go from the first to the fourth, or you can go from the first concentration to the first concentration of the formless realm, leaping over when you've developed your concentrative ability very much. But it's not as though on the seventh ground you have a special ability to do that. So now the third position is also incorrect as well. These are three positions of other people talking about why the seventh bhumi, by the Bodhisattva and the seventh bhumi outshines the Bodhisattva, outshines the hearers and solitary realizers by means of intelligence. This third position is incorrect as well, because the question of why Bodhisattvas on the sixth ground and below do not outshine the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through their realization, and why they can do so on the seventh ground is still left unresolved. So this third explanation amounts to citing the subjects of an argument as its proof of demonstration. Let's see, what are we saying here? Jeffrey says, therefore, this is like making a disputed subject itself into the reason. So what is that third position? Let's go back. The third position, a page or two before. Still, others claim that the Bodhisattva outshines the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through his intelligence because the gnosis of the seventh ground is manifestly directed toward the irreversible eighth ground. Actually, all of the wisdoms beforehand are also aimed toward that. So it's like just like not giving any real reasoning. How are we doing? Making sense? So Lama Tsongkhapa is, first of all, now has eliminated those three kinds of explanations that other Tibetan and Indian commentators had given to explain what Chandrakirti was referring to here. That the bodhisattvas on the seventh ground exceed the hearers and solitary realizers by means of intelligence. So then he continues, the explanation of the commentary. This is the title that's given to Jayananda's commentary. Remember, Chandrakirti wrote the Karikas and his own auto-commentary. The only other Sanskrit commentary to Madhyamaka Vatara was written by Jayananda, who had come to Tibet. So he was much later than Chandrakirti. The explanation of the commentary by Jayananda states that there is exertion on the seventh ground, because there still exists the thought, I will enter the path. As though, you have to think about it, you have to exert yourself. Yet, because the bodhisattva does not engage with signs, such as reading or listening to teachings, such as the sutras, he has attained the path of signlessness. This is Jayananda's explanation about the seventh ground, why it's special, that it exceeds the hearers and solitary realizers by means of intelligence. In contrast, those on the sixth ground, Jayananda says, and below, as well as the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, lack such signlessness. Thus, the Bodhisattva outshines Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through intelligence on the seventh ground. So that's Jayananda's explanation. Sometimes Lama Tsongkhapa agrees with Jayananda about general things, because Jayananda was privy to some oral tradition in India, because he'd come from India. He was an Indian pundit who came to Tibet. And I think the people aren't clear. They think that he may have composed his commentary to Chandrakirti in Tibet itself. But at any rate, he was privy to that, to the oral commentary in India. So some things Jayananda says about the commentary are correct. Other things are just grossly wrong. So be that as it may, Lama Tsongkhapa says, that is, whatever Jayananda said about this, leave it aside. I feel that this differentiation has to be associated with the realization of suchness. Lama Tsongkhapa says the fact that the bodhisattvas on the seventh ground are able to excel or outshine the hearers and solitary realizers in terms of intelligence has to do with realization of emptiness, of suchness. This too must be made in terms of entering into and rising out of suchness, the perfect endpoint, the Bhuta Koti, the perfect end, Yangdakpe Ta. That's what was earlier referred to as the as this sphere, the Bodhisattva's own sphere. So what does that mean? The perfect sphere of the Bodhisattva is that meditative equipoise on emptiness, single-pointed meditative equipoise on emptiness, where the mind, the subject, that is, when you talk about mind is a subject that knows its object, right? When the mind and its object, emptiness, are fused like water mixed with water, or a drop of milk mixed in a glass of water. They're indistinguishable. There's no duality of subject and object. This too must be made in terms of entering into and rising out of suchness, the perfect endpoint. The perfect endpoint means that meditative equipoise single-pointedly concentrated on emptiness so that there is no differentiation of subject and object. As will be explained below on the chapter on the seventh ground, that's many, many pages from here, because we have to go, the sixth ground is the longest chapter in the text, you might say. So the seventh ground comes after that. As will be explained below in the chapter on the seventh ground, it is on this ground, the seventh ground, and above, that the bodhisattva is able to enter into and arise out of cessation. This cessation doesn't mean just like the truth of cessation, that the delusions are ceased, but it refers to that single-pointed concentration on emptiness, direct realization where the subject and object are fused as one. The bodhisattva is able to enter into and arise out of cessation, the perfect endpoint, within each and every moment of cognition. So when the bodhisattva is not in meditative equipoise on emptiness, this perfect endpoint, where the mind is fused with emptiness, let's say the bodhisattva is looking at the trees or looking at his kitty cat or her kitty cat, and maybe develops affection for the kitty cat, realizes that that is an affliction, because on the seventh ground there's still all of the delusions are not yet eliminated, right? On the seventh ground, there's only on the 8th, 9th, and 10th that the delusions are eliminated. So the bodhisattva can enter into the meditative equipoise on emptiness, fused with the object emptiness, in one instant. To just go, pum, they're there, and then pum, they're out. If they want, they can stay in as long as they want. They can come out when they want. Generally, that's not easy to do. You can have say, for instance, if you just talk about a intellectual understanding of emptiness, where you have a mental image of emptiness, it's possible to jump into that quite quickly and jump out, because in that case there is a distinction between the subject and the object. They don't seem to be merged when you have an intellectual realization of emptiness, right? Shankar, are you following?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm just checking.
but I have something to say after you're done.
Okay, you say now. Say now.
No, please finish.
Oh, thank you. Okay. As will be explained below in the chapter on the seventh ground, it is on this ground and above that the bodhisattva is able to enter into and arise out of cessation on the perfect endpoint within each and every moment of cognition. This is not possible on the lower grounds. How do we know that? Because the Dashabhumika says that on the seventh ground, the bodhisattva is able to enter into that perfect endpoint in one instant. And when they want to, they can come out of it in one instant. Generally, it's not easy. It's easier to jump into the meditation on emptiness when there's just a generic image of emptiness, not a direct realization, where the subject mind and the object emptiness seem to be different. You can jump into that and jump out more easily. But when the mind, to jump into a state where the mind is fused with emptiness, the perfect endpoint, cessation, that earlier is difficult to do, because the process of merging the mind with emptiness requires a great deal of effort. But on the seventh ground and above, the bodhisattva is able to do that. This was not possible on the lower grounds, the 6th, 5th, 4th, and so forth. This is what my precious teacher says, and is an excellent explanation. So who's his perfect teacher? Precious teacher?
Rendawa?
Rendawa, yeah. Snagi's Snehi is off in India, enjoying holidays with her relatives. And I know Snehi has a lot of Sakya teachers who still, in the Sakya tradition, they still rely on Rendawa's commentary on the Madhyamaka Vatara. In fact, when I was translating Madhyamaka Vatara, we would use Rendawa's commentary, because in his commentary, the root verses, the karikas, are from another translator, Ngok, who was Lama Tsongkhapa. We'll see later on, there were different translators of the karikas into Tibetan from Sanskrit, right? The Sanskrit characters were translated into Tibetan, and the commentary, the auto commentary by Chandrakirti, was translated into Tibetan by different translators. And Lama Tsongkhapa sometimes thinks that Ngok translations of the karikas are better. Anyway, that was one of the reasons for reading that. But Rendawa, who was a Sakya, who was a guru of Lama Tsongkhapa, as Lama Tsongkhapa was also guru to Rendawa on certain subjects, they had this symbiotic relationship, very close relationship. This is what my precious teacher Rendawa says, and is an excellent explanation. On the paths where one engages suchness by means of imagination, given that in such a meditative concentration on emptiness, one's mind and suchness have not fused into a single taste, it is not difficult to enter and rise out of such meditative states within short moments. This is essentially what I was saying before. So when he's saying, when one engages on the paths where one engages suchness by means of imagination, what does that mean? Richard, what do you think? You have no idea? You're muted.
I was trying to understand it when you asked me what it meant, and I'm a little bit puzzled by it.
Yeah,
I just couldn't understand it. Sorry.
By means of imagination means by means of a mental image. So that means when you're engaging, when you haven't yet realized emptiness directly, but you were imagining emptiness, that is, you have a mental image of emptiness, the mind, the subject is separate from that mental image. On those stages, it's not difficult to enter into and jump out of that meditative equipoise. Okay, it's still a meditative equipoise, like say on the path of preparation, the bodhisattva, by meditating on that mental image, is able to subdue the delusions very, very much, not to cease them, not to cause cessation of the delusions as that requires actual direct realization of emptiness, but that bodhisattva has great realization of emptiness. On the paths where one engages suchness by means of imagination, by means of mental image, given that in such a meditative concentration on emptiness, one's mind and suchness have not fused into a single taste, right? They're still separate. They're not like direct realization of emptiness where they're fused into one. It is not difficult in those stages to enter and rise out of such meditative states within short moments. But on the Arya stage, from the path of seeing onward, where one's mind has fused with suchness like water poured into water. I think I mentioned this a little bit last time. I remember the example because Jennifer, one of our classmates, had sent me a little bottle of water from Lourdes. Remember, do you remember me mentioning that before? Blessed water from Lourdes, where I think the children saw the Virgin Mary, or something like that. So if I would take a drop of that water and drop it into a glass of my well water here, after a short instant, that those molecules of water from Lourdes would be, distributed and merged with my well water, so you couldn't differentiate one from the other. You couldn't say, oh, that's the Lourdes molecule. Lord. Am I pronouncing it right? Not Lord. Lord. How do you pronounce? Who knows French?
Lourdes.
Lourdes. Oh, Lourdes. Thank you. Lourdes water. I want to say the Lord's water. Sounds like Jesus water. You can't separate them. On the path where one engages such as by means of imagination, given that such a meditative concentration on emptiness, one's mind and suchness, if not fused into a single taste, it is not difficult to enter and rise out of meditative states within short moments. But on the Arya stage, where one's mind has fused with suchness, like water poured into water, this mode of entering into and arising out of emptiness within a short moment is extremely difficult. Make sense?
Actually, I'm a little bit
Who's speaking? Someone was speaking and then they muted. Oh, yeah. Say, Richard, what are you thinking? No, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, it sounds a little confusing to me. Why would it be more extremely difficult if his mind is fused with suchness like water poured into water? Why would it be so extremely difficult to enter into and arise out of emptiness? It would seem like it would be easier.
Well, let's say, for instance, to extricate the Lourdes water molecules out of my well water when they're mixed with one another is very difficult, right? They're interpenetrated.
Okay.
Whereas beforehand, when I have the eyedropper with the Lourdes water and my well water separate, you can separate them more easily. When the mind is merged with emptiness, that if you were to say, for instance, and this will be coming up quite shortly, on the path of preparation, when one has a meditative equipoise that's a union of calm abiding and tranquil abiding and penetrative insight on emptiness, your object is a mental image of emptiness. It's not emptiness itself, right? And your mind is something seems to be different than that. There is a duality. So to enter into that state and arise from that state is not difficult because your mind has not merged with emptiness itself. When the mind is merged with emptiness, like the interpenetration of the water molecules, it's difficult to separate them. It's difficult to get that interpenetration. Whereas on the seventh ground, the Bodhisattva has developed, so this is before the pure bhumis, right? This is just on the seventh ground, the last ground before the pure bhumis, where you start to eliminate the obstructions to omniscience. But on that seventh ground, he's reached the culmination of this ability to meditate on emptiness in a short instant, meditate on the end point, the perfect end point, the Bhuta Koti, the cessation, that there was the mind is merged with emptiness, has a special ability to enter into that in the shortest moment and arise from that in the shortest moment. I remember Lama Yeshe, precious guru, when asking a question, sometime Lama would sort of his eyes would go up. I don't know. I can't do it. You know how as though sometimes when people, as though they're meditating on their third eye or something like that, eyes go up, and that seemed to be Lama entering into meditative equipoise on emptiness. So the Bodhisattva on the seventh ground and above is able to enter into that perfect endpoint in one instant and come out of that in one instant, whereas below that, they're not. And that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says is the reason that the seventh ground Bodhisattva excels the hearers and solitary realizers by means of intelligence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I have
Yeah, Shankar.
So I have a question. So going back to fundamentals, so if you have single pointed concentration, right, you have reached the 10th stage of tranquil abiding, right? Let's say,
Yeah.
or 9th stage, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so you have, shine, and so whatever object you're using, whether it's a mental image or of emptiness or whatever object you're using, is it not that your mind is fused with that object? That is correct, right?
Yes, but that's just tranquil abiding. So when you have a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight,
Right.
that's not, well, first of all, you can have a union of penetrative, of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, shamatha and vipassana, meditating on the mental image of emptiness, but that mental image of emptiness is not emptiness itself.
Right, I understand. So okay. So you do, so the distinction is then that on the distinction is basically whether or not it's the mental, specifically it's about emptiness. First of all, it's about emptiness and specifically about whether or not it's a mental image or not. That's a distinction at the 8th stage, right? Because anybody would no, but sorry, 7th stage. Sorry, 7th stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
The only reason I'm asking all these things is because
there's not all these things. You just ask one thing. That's okay. Good. One thing.
No, I was asking one thing, but I wanted the explanation before I asked you, because one time Venerable Rene and I were in a retreat with Chudin Rinpoche.
Yeah.
And Venerable Rene, he told me this story that he asked in private to Chudin Rinpoche, how long does it take you to just go into single pointed concentration? Right?
On what?
Well, that's the thing. I can't
Okay,
remember.
go tell the story. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have to ask him exactly. I believe it was about the emptiness. But anyway, so Chudin Rinpoche said, oh, it's an instant.
Yeah,
Takes no time.
Chudin Rinpoche may have been 7th level bodhisattva
So
or
I
higher.
was so now I can't remember exactly whether, I don't think he was speaking about the mental image, but anyway, I'll have to ask. I can't remember.
So if Chudin Rinpoche was 7th Bhumi Bodhisattva, he could do that. He could enter into meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness in one instant.
Yeah, I don't know. He didn't mention it. He didn't. Venerable Rene didn't ask him how long it takes you to get out of it, but I assume it's also if he can get in for an instant, he can get out in an instant.
Yeah. So
okay,
I believe you're right that when one is on the path of preparation, just before achieving the path of seeing, your mind can merge as though merge with the mental image of emptiness, but that's not the same as merging with emptiness itself. Okay, it's as though, say, for instance, when you, as you rightly bring up, when you have a single pointed concentration, fully qualified shamatha, say, meditating on your body as Vajrayogini or meditating on the Buddha in front, just Shakyamuni Buddha. You've taken that as your mental image. It's as though your mind and the Buddha's body, there's not a separation of subject and object, but that's just a mental image of the Buddha's body, right? Sean, what are you thinking? Hello?
Well, I'm just wondering, do they ever discuss whether it's hard? I would think it would be harder to maintain that fusion than it would be to come out of it. But are they saying, do they ever say whether it's harder to enter versus arise out of the direct state?
Wow, you have fine points. I don't think there's, for the seventh Bhumi Bodhisattva, it's just as easy to go in and to come out because of their various factors, their intelligence, their realization, their accumulation of merit. It's like something that they've been trying to do. When they try to do that on the 6th Bhumi and below to enter into the perfect endpoint, That means where the mind is fused with the actual direct realization of emptiness. It takes some time to enter into that. Probably on the 6th bhumi, it's a shorter amount of time than it was on the 5th bhumi. On the 4th bhumi, it took longer to do that. On the second, the 3rd bhumi, 2nd bhumi, it took longer to enter into that. They could have that perfect endpoint where the mind would be fused with emptiness, but it would take some time. By the 7th ground, they're able to do it in one instant and to come out of that in one instant. Okay.
I do know that Chön Rinpoche in that same retreat did say that once you have that, the Shine and along with perfect insight, Vipassana, that he didn't mention himself, but I assume he was referring to this. He said that you can maintain that forever if you want to, and it's effortless. So basically it's very easy for him to just stay in that meditative.
Stay in is not the question. The question is entering into and exiting from. That's the difficult part. So when one has a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, one can remain in that as long as one wants. Sometimes it's also due to one's karma, one's meditative equipoise will begin to diminish. But in general, when you have a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, you can remain for hours, days, usually, so what different measures. If you can remain in that meditative concentration for 9 days, you've reached the gross generation stage of Tantra. When you can remain in that meditative concentration without, anything else bothering you, you can remain for, I think, 9 days.
And if I remember correctly, I never totally understood it. Again, I have to ask somebody who was there. If I remember correctly, he also said that you can remain in meditative equipoise on an object and do something else at the same time. But
no,
that wasn't clear to me.
If you're in that meditative equipoise of union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight on an object, nothing else, you're just there in meditation. There's nothing else. You can't be doing anything else. Mintu, what are your, show yourself. There you are.
I'm glad to see that you're well, Brother George.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have a quick question. So I think, so basically, usually when I think about emptiness, is it usually defined as the nature of phenomena that lack an intrinsic existence. So how can
you're breaking up a little bit? Point your mouth toward your microphone a little bit better.
Okay. So
speak a little more clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, when we talk about emptiness, it's usually defined as the lack of the absence of an intrinsic existence of phenomena. So the nature of things of that doesn't have an intrinsic existence, that absence of a fictitious intrinsic existence. So then how can your mind merge with a pure negation? You know what I mean? It's like, I can understand how your mind can merge with a mental image of your feeling of something, but how can your mind merge with like a negation of something that doesn't exist?
Right. So well, negation is something that doesn't exist. It's a mere negation. And according to the Hinayana tenets of Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, that is not something that can be directly realized. That's kind of your position. Whereas for the Mahayana tenets, starting with Chittamatra and the lower Madhyamaka schools, even a non-affirming negation, like emptiness, can be realized directly. It can appear to your mind first as a mental image, and then your mind can merge with that. So that's something you'll have to investigate Go back to tenets. Okay, let me.
Actually, I was gonna. Yeah, the Realizing Emptiness book by Gen Lam Rinpa actually talks about that. It does mention how that can happen. But any case,
what can happen?
How the mind can quote unquote see emptiness.
Right. So what Mintu is thinking, kind of like in the Vaibhashika or Trantika traditions, a non-affirming negation is not something that presents itself as a manifest phenomena, so it can't be perceived directly. Whereas for the Mahayana, it can be realized directly. So Mintu, you get again on Ripa's book, what is it called? Realizing Emptiness? And read that. Okay, let me just continue a little bit more. Can I continue? You okay?
Is it a book? I'm sorry. I lost it.
A book by Gen Lam Rinpa called Realizing Emptiness. There's Shanka is showing it on the screen there.
Oh,
Gen
awesome.
Lam Rinpa. He's not Geshe Lam Rinpa. He never got his Geshe degree, but he was a great meditator. Doris, you have a question? You're just stretching. Okay. So Lama Tsongkhapa continues. You might be wondering. Okay, here we go. You might be wondering, why are we discussing how on the seventh ground, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas are outshone through intelligence, when the context here is a description of the qualities of the first ground? Right? You might be wondering that. The fault of conflating context does not apply. The presentation in this text on the first ground and so on are based on the Sutra of the 10 Grounds, the 10 Ground Sutra. And that sutra clarifies that one abiding on the first ground outshines Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through his or her conventional awakening mind and not through his ultimate awakening mind. Then, to help dispel the qualm, the qualm being, well then, from what ground does the Bodhisattva outshine the others through his realization? It explains that he would outshine the others through his realization starting from the seventh ground. This statement from the sutra is presented here in Chandrakirti's text as well, so you should know that context is perfectly appropriate. Okay. So we've kind of gone over what we've gone over before. Then the concluding implications of these statements. This has three parts. How the 10 Ground Sutra demonstrates that the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas possess the realization of phenomena as lacking intrinsic existence, inherent existence, the sources that substantiate this point, and the rebutting objections raised against the presentation. Okay, so how the Dashibhumika Sutra demonstrates that Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas possess the realization of phenomena as lacking inherent or intrinsic existence. There are two outlines, explaining clearly the intent of the commentary author. Commentary author is Chandrakirti, right? And how this is also the standpoint of the guide to the Bodhisattva way. So it's also Chandrakirti and Shantideva both have the same understanding that the hearers and solitary realizers have to realize emptiness. So explaining clearly the intent of the commentary author, that's Chandrakirti, on the basis of this citation from the 10 Ground Sutra, where it states that on the sixth ground and below, the Bodhisattva cannot outshine Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through his realization, right, through his intelligence, but it can be clearly determined that Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas also possess the knowledge that phenomena lack intrinsic existence. Okay, so why is that? The Ten Bhumi Sutra, if we accept that is the the, teaching of the Buddha, omniscient mind. It's true, definitive teaching about emptiness. Not all of the Dashabhumi Sutra is talking about emptiness, it's talking about also relative things. But so if it's only on the seventh ground that the bodhisattvas excel the hearers and solitary realizers by means of wisdom, by means of intelligence, that means on the first ground, they didn't excel the hearers and solitary realizers by means of intelligence. If you were to accept that a hearer or solitary realizer, Arya, someone on the first ground, if you accepted that they became an Arya being without realizing emptiness, simply by realizing the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, what Prasangika would call the gross selflessness of persons, if they became an Arya by means of that, then the bodhisattva on the first ground would excel the hearers and solitary realizers by means of intelligence. Because the bodhisattva on the first ground realizes the emptiness of intrinsic existence, the emptiness of inherent existence, right? Without such wisdom, then, I say what wisdom he's talking about here. On the basis of this citation from the Dashabhumika, where it states that on the sixth ground and below, the bodhisattva cannot outshine the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas through his realizations, through his wisdom, through his intelligence, it can be clearly determined that Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas also possess knowledge that phenomena lack intrinsic existence. Otherwise, the bodhisattva on the first ground would excel them by wisdom. Without such wisdom, then, like the seers, the actual word here is rishis, like we've talked about before, rishis. You remember Maharishi? The word Maharishi. Has anyone not heard of Maharishi? Mahesh Yogi, you haven't, Maria? So Maharishi is a term that's often used in India. So a rishi is someone who is, Chuptan Jimba just translates it as seer. I think Jeffrey translates as sage or something like that. A rishi is someone who has great meditative abilities and who is always truthful and whose word can be taken. In fact, if they make a curse against you, it's like in the Lord of the Rings or something like that. The curse will come true. So rishis or seers. So without such wisdom, without the realization of emptiness of inherent existence, like the seers or the rishis who become free of attachment toward all levels of cyclic existence, except the peak of existence, through the mundane path. So that means mundane vipassana. Remember when we talked about vipassana, we say there's mundane vipassana and supra-mundane vipassana. Mundane vipassana means what even non-Buddhists can do. They can achieve the first concentration of the form realm, the second concentration, the third concentration, fourth concentration. They can achieve the first concentration of the formless realm, the second concentration, the third, and even the fourth. And in so doing, in each level, say for instance, when they achieve the first concentration of the form realm, they separate themselves from the delusions of the desire realm. In doing so, they suppress those delusions. So when they, in that meditative equipoise, they don't have any of the delusions of the desire realm, when they have the meditative concentration on the first form concentration. If they meditate then on achieving the second concentration, they have to separate their mind from the afflictions of the first concentration, because there's still some afflictions there. subtler than the afflictions of the desire realm. And in so doing, they reach the second concentration of the form realm, but they haven't eliminated the delusions of the next realm up, right? The third realm. When they meditate, when they use mundane vipassana to separate themselves from those delusions, they can achieve the third concentration and so forth, all the way up. So when they achieve the highest of the formless absorptions, they've separated themselves from all of the delusions of the desire realm, all of the delusions of the form realm, and all of the delusions of the first three formless realms. But they still have subtle kind of delusion of that fourth formless absorption, which is also called the peak of samsara. Have you heard that term before, peak of samsara? So there's no way, and in fact, they've separated from the delusions of the desire realm, form realm, and the first three formless absorptions, but not in the sense that they will never come back. They haven't ceased them with analytical cessation so that they'll never come back. They've just been suppressed. But there's no way then for that person, by using that mundane vipassana, to separate themselves from the delusions of the peak of samsara. And because of that, sooner or later, when their concentration diminishes, when they die from that realm, they're born in cyclic existence again, and all the delusions, the seeds of those delusions are still there, and they're still caught in cyclic existence. So like the seers who become free of attachment toward all levels of cyclic existence, except the peak of existence, peak of cyclic existence, through the mundane path of mundane vipassana, viewing the realms of existence in terms of gradations of refinement. What that means is when you're, let's say if you're in the first concentration, you want to achieve the second concentration, you look at the advantages of the second concentration and the disadvantages of the concentration you're in, the first concentration. And by using mundane vipassana, analyzing in that way, you develop the aspiration to achieve that second concentration and disillusionment with the first concentration, and then you can actually achieve that second concentration. That's what's meant here by, in terms of gradations of refinement. Jeffrey translates it as, if hearers and solitary realizers did not have this wisdom, then even those bodhisattvas who generate the first ultimate mind, the first ground, would outshine them from the viewpoint of their realizations. Hearers and solitary realizers would be like sages, or Jimpa translates seers, who depend on worldly paths, that means mundane vipassana, which have the aspect of considering lower realms to be gross, the disadvantages of the lower realm, and the higher levels to be peaceful. That's what Tumten Jimpa is translating as gradations here. So the lower realm is bad, the upper realm is good, using mundane vipassana to meditate in that way, and thereby become free from desire. Free from desire doesn't mean that it has been ceased. It means that they have been separated from that desire. So it's not manifest in their mind, with the exception that for the level called peak of cyclic existence, there's no other vipassana, mundane vipassana, to suppress those delusions. Okay, seers to become Pradika Buddhas also, who has generated the first ground of. This would be so because Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas would lack the knowledge that things lack intrinsic existence. So if the hearers and solitary realizers didn't actually realize emptiness when they become an Arya being, if it was sufficient to become an Arya simply to realize the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, they would not have eliminated all of the delusions. They would not have ceased the delusions. They would be like the non-Buddhist rishis and so forth, other kinds of meditators who can reach the peak of cyclic existence, but still be caught in cyclic existence because they've only suppressed the delusions by means of that mundane vipassana. Are we following? Okay. The commentary's statement, that means Chandrakirti's auto-commentary, statement that otherwise, like non-Buddhist seers, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas would not have eliminated all the afflictions pertaining to the three realms along with their seeds. So he's quoting that from Chandrakirti's auto-commentary. That statement indicates that if Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas have not familiarized themselves with emptiness by perfectly realizing it, not just familiarized, but realizing it, they will not have destroyed the seeds of afflictions, and their paths will resemble the mundane path that views the realms of existence in comparative terms of fine and gross. You know, upper realm is better, lower realm is worse. You know, what we call mundane vipassana that can lead you into that. They'd be no different than that. They've just suppressed the delusions. How are we doing? Okay, just a little bit more. We've gone over. Furthermore, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, by lacking the realization of suchness, if they indeed only realize the selflessness of persons, the gross selflessness of persons, lack of self-supporting, substantially existent person, they didn't realize emptiness, suchness, they would then objectify the aggregates of form and so on as real. That means they would view, you know, other phenomena besides the self as having inherent existence. And their minds would continue to be distorted. In that case, their realization of the selflessness of persons would be superficial and incomplete. It would only be a realization of the gross selflessness of persons, the realization of which does cause the delusions to be pushed down, but doesn't cause them to cease. If you realize the gross selflessness of persons, the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, your delusions, the afflictions that depend upon that, gross afflictions are subdued, but the afflictions that depend upon grasping at true existence, grasping at an inherent existence, they would not be pressed down at all. They would still be there. So in that case, their realization of the selflessness of persons would be superficial and incomplete if they only realized the gross selflessness of persons. For they would not have eradicated the mind that perceives the aggregates, the basis for conceiving self or personhood, as real. They would not have eradicated the mind that perceives the aggregates as inherently existent, which is the basis for conceiving the self. This suggests that if one has not eradicated the object of apprehension in relation to grasping at the aggregates, the designative bases, like what Shankar was talking about before, how do you designate the person? You designate the person or name or impute the person on the basis of the aggregates. A person is or let's say the self is a person that is imputed upon the five aggregates, right? Actually, it has to be at least the mind aggregate if someone is in the formless realm. But a person, the self is a person that is imputed upon the five aggregates. That's their basis of designation. This suggests that if one has not eradicated the object of apprehension in relation to grasping at the aggregates. So what's the object of apprehension mean here? That means when you view the aggregates, if you haven't realized that the aggregates themselves are empty of inherent existence, you still think that the person that's imputed upon the five aggregates, maybe you think the person that's imputed upon the five aggregates is empty of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, but the aggregates do inherently exist, that one will also have not eradicated the object of apprehension in relation to grasping at the person, the designated attribute, as real or as inherently existent. So you might think that that hearer, solitary realizer, could realize the emptiness of the person, the self, the selflessness of person, even in a more sophisticated way, is that the person was empty of inherent existence. But unless they've realized that the aggregates themselves are also empty of inherent existence, their realization of the emptiness of the person would not be authentic, would not be correct. This suggests that if one has not eradicated the object of apprehension in relation to grasping at the aggregates, the designated bases, so the basis of designation, how you designate or impute the person is upon the five aggregates. If you haven't eradicated the object of apprehension, meaning that you haven't eliminated the apprehension that the aggregates are inherently existent, if you haven't eliminated that, if you haven't realized that the aggregates are empty of inherent existence, one will also have not eradicated the object of apprehension in relation to grasping at the person, which you thought you might have, you thought you had a realization of that, but if you still think that the aggregates are inherently existent, you haven't even realized the emptiness of the person. In that case, Chandrakirti's text shows, since one would not have realized the person to be empty of true existence, would not have realized the person to be empty of inherent existence, one would have also not realized the genuine selflessness of persons in its entirety. So either you could assume that the person was meditating, the hearer, solitary realizer, was meditating on this lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, in which case, and they were holding the aggregates to be inherently existent, in which case they have not realized the genuine selflessness of persons in its entirety. They've only realized the gross selflessness of persons. Or if you think that that hearer, solitary realizer, was meditating on the emptiness of the person in the sense of the Mahayana meaning of emptiness, the person is devoid of being inherently existent. But if they were to hold the aggregates themselves, the body, mind, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, to be inherently existent, that realization of the emptiness of the person would not be a genuine selflessness of the persons in its entirety. Subtle point. Shankar, what do you think?
So am I correct in interpreting this, that what he's saying is you have to have realized both selflessness of person and phenomena?
You have to realize the selflessness of person in its most subtle form, that the person is not just empty of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, but the person is empty of being inherently existent. If you've realized that, you should have realized that the aggregates also are empty of inherent existence. Because very famous quotation from Arya Deva, realizing the emptiness of one thing, one phenomenon, means that you've realized the emptiness of all. It doesn't mean that you've applied it to everything, but the same reasoning would hold. If you realize the person, yourself, like say in the 4-point analysis, if you've realized that the person is empty of inherent existence, when you awake from that, you would also recognize your microphone, the trees, the house are also empty of inherent existence by the same reasoning. Okay. So, what did I say? In that case, Chandrakirti's text shows, since one would not have realized the person to be empty of true existence, here you could say empty of inherent existence, one then would have also not realized genuine selflessness of persons in its entirety. You would have only realized the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, say. The meaning of these points presented above seems especially difficult to comprehend. Would you agree?
Nah.
Snap, right? Intuitively obvious to the most casual observer. I think I mentioned before, one of my teachers in university, when I complained about one of the other physics lecturers, or no, when he would explain something up on the blackboard, you know, it'd be like, at MIT, these big green blackboards, there's a third of the room, go through all three, and then at the end, you know, and then he'd turn around and say, intuitively obvious to the most casual observer. You know. The meaning of these points presented above seems especially difficult to comprehend. Even those who typically rely on this tradition, you know, Chandrakirti's tradition, and Shantideva's works, who rely on those, appear to have struggled to explain them well. So, for that reason, to critically examine this issue of whether Shravakas and Pratika Buddhists possess the realization of emptiness, I will present here in the coming weeks how this doubt arises in the first place and how to resolve it. Okay, so the crux of this presentation is that hearers and solitary realizers, according to Prasangika, according to Nagarjuna, according to the sutras that Buddha taught, according to Chandrakirti, according to Shantideva, hearers and solitary realizers definitely have to realize emptiness, even though in their own texts in the Pali Canon that the Hinayana followers, the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas rely on, even though they seem to imply that you can achieve nirvana, you can become an Arya and achieve nirvana simply by realizing the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. That's not right. That those people that are thought to be Aryas and Arhats, by simply that meditation alone, are not really Arhats. They have not reached nirvana. They have not reached liberation, and that they will eventually enter back into cyclic existence. So that can be verified by various things, or, you know, in the sutras, in the Hinayana tradition, it talks about Arhats who have fallen. You know, they thought, you know, they reached nirvana because they, by meditating on the lack of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, they've subdued all of the delusions. But then when their mind becomes distracted or the meditative concentration becomes lessened, and they see something attractive or they see something repulsive, you know, something that kindles their anger or something that kindles their attachment, those delusions can rise again, and they talk about arhats who have fallen. So they were never arhats to begin with because they hadn't realized the emptiness of inherent existence. But those arhats that are true arhats, and we'll see what kind of Hinayana sutras that they would rely on, that have realized the emptiness of the person. They don't have bodhicitta, but they still have the desire to escape cyclic existence for themselves alone. They can achieve the state of Arya. They can be an actual Arya, and they can achieve arhatship. Suvansh, you look a little bit stern there. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. Nadine, what do you think?
Thank you so much for the teachings. I will repeat it. It was quite difficult today, but
Yeah.
I could follow. Thank you.
Okay, so you're most of us would agree with Lama Tsongkhapa, just that paragraph before. It says, the meaning of these points presented above seems especially difficult to comprehend. All right, most of us would agree. So that's where we'll stop. Any last question before we dedicate merits? Rachel?
Venerable George, you mentioned that someone in Oregon or Washington was nearing the end of their days. Can we dedicate to them, and can you let us know who that is?
Yeah, it's Bill McGee.
Oh,
you know Bill, right?
I do.
You knew Bill well, yeah, from the farm.
I do.
Yeah. So Paul has gone off to be with him and Rabia, his wife. I think he's in hospice, and Paul he sent me an email saying he was going to miss class because one of the hopes was that everyone who was following the class would try to attend all of the teachings, whereas it doesn't seem like, that has followed through. But Paul, being good student, said, I'm pleased for this. So Bill McGee was with Jeffrey Hopkins, when Jeffrey Hopkins at University of Virginia had a bunch of students. Paul was one of them, Bill McGee, several others, authors that you probably know well. Then Jeffrey started something called the Farm, the Dharma Farm, where they lived and they would do translations and work and so forth. Bill McGee was one of the originators of that. So he's in his last days. So yeah, it'd be very good to dedicate your merits that Bill, if he can recover, it would be wonderful. But if he's on his last legs, that he, in future lives, that he quickly find a perfect Mahayana guru and develop renunciation, bodhicitta, and the right view of emptiness, quickly progress the bodhisattva path and achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So, yeah, here we go. Dedication prayers. Due to these merits, due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and may Bill McGee quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all migrators without exception into that very enlightened state. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayer for Lama Sopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the Muni's moral code, serving as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, masterfully accomplishing magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And to all our teachers, Dalai Lamas, and so forth, eyes to view all the infinite scriptures. You serve as my eye to see all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateway for the fortunate traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by love, all illuminating spiritual friends, I make this request, please live a long and stable life. So, thank you. Review and take a look at the Facebook page if you have a chance. I will try to make sure that the document that will be coming up next time that I shared with a couple of you about how does one establish that a yogic direct perceiver exists? How you can verify or certify or establish that it's possible to have a direct realization of emptiness. That will be coming in the coming talk, and hopefully that will be posted up. Maybe Doris, you can post that up on the Facebook page. Read ahead, read before, go over this material, which, as Lama Tsongkhapa said, the meaning of these points presented above seems especially difficult to comprehend. If Lama Tsongkhapa said that, don't fret that you thought it was especially difficult to comprehend. Okay.
Yeah,
So
but he had Manjushri quarterbacking him, right? So I
he did have a quarterback, right? So look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable.
Bye-bye now. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you very much, George.
Thank you.
Marianne. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Sheila, and everybody who made this broadcast, this connection possible.